In this video, we are going to use Yargs, a third-party NPM module, to make the process of parsing much easier. It's going to let us access things like title and body information without needing to write a manual parser. This is a great example of when you should look for an NPM module. We're about to write some really boring code if we don't use a module. It's much more productive for our Node application to use a third-party module that has been tested and thoroughly vetted. Now to get started, we're going to install the module, then we'll add it into the project, parsing for things like the title and the body, and we'll call all of the functions that are going to get defined over in notes.js. If the command is add, we'll call add note, so on and so forth. To get started, we can go view the docs page for Yargs. It's always a good idea to know what you're getting yourself into. If you Google Yargs, it should be the first result. Here we have the GitHub page for the Yargs library. Now, Yargs is a very complex library. It has a ton of features for validating all sorts of input, and it has different ways you can format that input. We are going to start with a very basic example, although we will be introducing more complex examples throughout this section. For now, though, this is the docs, and if you want to look at any other features that we don't discuss in this section, or you just want to see how something works we have talked about, you can always find it here. What we're going to do, though, is move into the terminal to install this module inside of our application. That's going to get done using npm install, followed by the module name, yargs, Yargs. And in this case, I'm going to use the @ sign to specify a specific version of the module I want to use. In this case, 4.7.1, which is the most recent version at the time this video was filmed. Throughout the course, I will be using version numbers on some modules in case they change down the line. I want to make sure the videos still work. After you go through the videos, you can always update to the latest versions of the modules to check that there's no breaking changes. If there is no breaking changes, great. Stay on the latest version. If there's not, go ahead and revert. For now, though, go ahead and use 4.7.1. I'm going to add the save flag, which, as we know, updates the package.json file. If I leave off the save flag, Yargs is going to get installed into the Node modules folder, but if we wipe that Node modules folder later and run npm install, Yargs won't get reinstalled because it's not listed in the package.json file. This is why we use the save flag. And now that I'm installing Yargs, we can move over into Atom inside of app.js and get started using it. And the basics of Yargs, the very core of its feature set, is really simple to take advantage of. The first thing we're going to do is require it up above, just like we did fs and Lodash. Let's make a constant and call it Yargs, setting it equal to, you guessed it, require Yargs. From here, we can go ahead and fetch the arguments as Yargs parses them. It's taking the same process.argv array, but it's going behind the scenes and parsing it, giving us something that's much more useful than what Node gives us. Up above, just above my command variable, we can make a const called argv, setting it equal to yargs.argv. Yargs.argv is where the Yargs library stores its version of the arguments that your app ran with. Now we can go ahead and print it out down below, and this is going to let us take a look at process.argv and the yargs.argv variable, and we can compare them and see how Yargs differs. For the command where we use console.log to print process.argv, I'm going to make the first argument a string called process so we can differentiate it in the terminal. We're going to call console.log again. The first argument is going to be the string Yargs, and the second one will be the actual argv variable, which comes from Yargs. Now, we can go ahead and run our app a few different ways and see how these two differ. First up, we're going to run node app.js with the add command, and we can run this very basic example. And we already know what the process.argv array looks like. The useful information is this third string inside of the array, which is add. Down below, on the other hand, Yargs gives us an object that looks very different. Here we have the underscore property. This is where commands like add are stored. If I were to add another command like add, and then I were to add a modifier like encrypted, you can see that add is the first argument and encrypted is the second. Now, so far, Yargs really isn't shining. This isn't much more useful than what we have up above. Where it really shines is when we start passing in key value pairs, like that title example we used in the last video. I can set my title equal to secrets, hit enter, and this time around we get something much more useful. Up above, we have a string that we would need to parse in order to fetch the value and the key. Down below, we actually have a title property with a value of secrets. And Yargs has built-in parsing for all the different ways you could specify this. We could put a space after title and it still works just as it did before. We could add quotes around secrets, adding another word, like secrets from Andrew. And it parses it correctly, setting the title prop to the string secrets from Andrew. This is where Yargs really shines. It makes the process of parsing your arguments much, much easier. That means over inside of our app, we can take advantage of that parsing, calling the proper functions. Let's take add, for example. Once the add command gets called, we want to call a function defined in notes that's going to be responsible for actually adding the note. Notes.addNote is going to get the job done. And what do we want to pass to add note? We want to pass in two things. The title, which is accessible on argv.title, as we saw here, and the body, argv.body. Currently, these command line arguments, title and body, aren't required. So technically, the user could run the application without one of them, which would cause it to crash. But in the future, we'll be requiring both of these. Now that we have this in place, we can remove our console.log statement, which was just a placeholder, and we can move into the Notes application. Inside of Notes, I'm going to wipe what we have so far since it was just a basic example, and we're going to get started by making a variable with the same name as the method we used over in app.js, add note, and it's going to get set equal to an anonymous arrow function just like this. Now this alone isn't too useful because we're not exporting the add note function. Down below, we can define module.exports in a slightly different way. In the past, we added properties onto exports to export them. We can actually define an entire object that gets set to exports. And in this case, we can set add note equal to the add note function defined up above. Now in ES6, there's actually a shortcut for this. When you're setting an object attribute and a value that's a variable, and they're both exactly the same, you can actually leave off the colon and the value. This is identical. Here, we're setting an object equal to module.exports. That object has a property add note, which points to the add note function above. Once again, this and this are identical inside of ES6. We are going to be using the ES6 syntax for everything throughout this course. Now I can take my two arguments, title and body, and actually do something with them. In this case, we're not going to be modifying the database just yet, although we are getting pretty close. For now, what we're going to do is call console.log, adding note, passing in the two arguments as the second and third argument to console.log, title and body. And now we're in a pretty good position to run the add command with title and body and see if we get exactly what we'd expect, which is this console.log statement to print. Over in the terminal, we can start by running the app with Node, then specifying the file name. We're going to use the add command, which will run the appropriate function. Then we're going to pass in title, setting it equal to secret. And we can pass in body, which is going to be our second command line argument, setting that equal to a string, since I'm going to have some spaces. This is my secret. Right here, we've specified three things: the command add, the title argument, which gets set to secret, and the body argument, which gets set to this is my secret. If all goes well, we'll get the appropriate log. Let's run the command, and right here you can see adding note. We have secret, which is the title, and this is my secret, which is the body. And this log is the one we have defined right here, which is fantastic. With this in place, we now have one of our methods set up and ready to go. The next thing that we're going to do is convert the other ones. We have list, we have read, and we have remove. Let's do one more together, and then you'll do the other two by yourself. Now, the list command is right here. I'm going to remove the console.log statement and call notes.getAll. At some point, getAll is going to return all of the notes. Now, once again, this is not wired up. Now getAll doesn't take any arguments since it's going to return all of the notes regardless of the title. The read command is going to require a title, and remove will also require the title of the note you want to remove. For now though, we can create the getAll function. Over inside of notes, we're going to go through that process again. We're going to start by making a variable, calling it getAll, and setting it equal to an arrow function, which we've used before. We start with our arguments list, then we set up the arrow, which is the equal sign and the greater than sign, then we specify the statements we want to run. Inside of our code block, we're going to run console.log getting all notes. The last step to the process after adding that semicolon is going to be to add getAll to the exports. Here we can use getAll just like this. And what we have here is identical to this. Remember, in ES6, if you have a property whose name is identical to the value, which is a variable, you can simply remove the value variable and the colon. Perfect. And now that we have this in place and we've wired it up in app.js, which I did not mean to just close, we can go ahead and run things over inside of the terminal. In this case, we're going to run that list command. Node app.js list. And right here, you can see at the bottom, getting all notes prints to the screen. And this is fantastic. Now that we have this in place, we can go ahead and remove the process log since we no longer need that. I am going to keep the Yargs log around since we will be exploring other ways to use Yargs throughout the section. What I'd like you to do as the challenge for this video is to create a method for the read command and the remove command. You're going to create inside of notes.js a getNote function, which is going to take the title. Then you can go ahead and use a console.log to print getting note and just print the title to make sure it works. And you're going to do the same thing for remove. Right here, you're going to call notes.removeNote, passing in the title of the note you want to remove. And once again, when you define the function, go ahead and log out the title argument to make sure it was passed in properly. Then, over in the terminal, I want you to run both of them, passing in the title and making sure the log prints as expected. Go ahead and do this. Pause the video, knock it out, run both read and remove from the terminal to test your work, and when you're done, click play. How'd you do? Hopefully you didn't have too much trouble creating and calling both of those functions. We're going to get started with the command for read first. When the read command is used, we want to call notes.getNote, passing in the title. Now the title is going to get passed in and parsed using Yargs, which means we can use argv.title to fetch it. And that's all we have to do when it comes to calling the function. The next step is to define getNote because currently it doesn't exist. Over inside of notes.js, right below getAll, we can make a variable called getNote. GetNote is going to be a function. We're going to use the arrow function. And it is going to take an argument. It's going to take the note title. GetNote takes the title, then it returns the body for that note. Inside of getNote, we can use console.log to print something like getting note, followed by the title of the note you're going to fetch, which is going to be the second argument to console.log. Perfect. That's the first one, and we can go ahead and test it before we go on to the second one, which is remove. Over in the terminal, we can use node app.js to run the file. We're going to be using the new read command, passing in a title. I'm going to use a different syntax where title gets set equal to the value outside of quotes. I'm going to use something like accounts. This is going to read the accounts note in the future, and it's going to print it to the screen. For now, though, we get an error, which is fantastic. Getting an error is not the end of the world. Getting an error means you usually have a small typo or you forgot one step in the process. And what we're going to take a moment to do is figure out how to parse through these error messages, because what you get, which is what I've highlighted here, can be pretty daunting. As you can see, the first line, it shows you where the error occurred. It's inside of our app.js file, and the number after the colon is the line, on line 19. It shows you the line, and it shows you exactly where things went bad. Type error. Notes.getNote is not a function. It's telling you pretty clearly that the function you tried to run, getNote, doesn't exist. And now we can take this information and go debug our app. Right here, we see we call notes.getNote. Everything looks great. But when we move into notes.js, we realize that we never actually exported getNote. That is why when we try to call the function, we get getNote is not a function because we never exported it. All we have to do to fix that error message is export getNote just like this. When I save the file and rerun the app from the terminal, now we're going to get what we expect, which is getting note followed by the title, which is accounts. And that is how we can debug our error messages. Error messages, for the most part, contain really useful information. Right here, we have some useful information, and down below, we have a lot of useless information. This is the stack trace. It's all the code that's running to get to the point where the error happened. For the most part, the first couple lines are code that you've written, and the other ones are internal Node code or third-party modules. In our case, the first line of the stack trace is important. It shows exactly where the error occurred. When you get an error inside of your app, which you totally will throughout the course, don't worry. It's usually the result of a simple mistake. In our case, we simply forgot to export the function. Now, though, the read command is working, so we can move on to the last one, which is going to be the remove command. I'm going to remove the console.log statement and call notes.removeNote, passing in the title, which, as we know, is available under argv.title. Next up, we're going to define the remove note function over inside of our notes API file, right below getNote, var remove note. Now, remove note is going to work much the same way as getNote. All it needs is the title. It can use that information to find the note and remove it from the database. This is going to be an arrow function that takes the title argument. And for the moment, we're going to print the console.log statement, removing note. Then, as the second argument, we're going to simply print that title back to the screen to make sure that it's going through the process successfully. This time around, we're not going to forget to export our remove note function. We're going to define it right here, remove note, using the ES6 syntax. The last thing to do is to test it and make sure it works. We can reload the last command using the up arrow key. We can change read to remove, and that is all we need to do. We're still passing in the title, which is great because that is what remove needs. When I run the command, we get exactly what we expected. Removing note prints to the screen, and then we get the title of the note that we're supposed to be removing, which is accounts, which looks great. That is all it takes to use Yargs to parse your arguments. Let's take a quick moment to recap what we learned. We learned that parsing in process.argv can be a real pain in the butt. We would have to write a lot of manual code to parse out those hyphens, the equal signs, and the optional quotes. It's a real pain. Yargs can do all of that for us, and it puts it on a really simple object we can access. Now, here we use the argv object coming from Yargs to grab the title, and here we use it to grab the body. And these are all the methods that we're actually going to be calling throughout the course. Currently, none of them are wired up, but we now have a place to define all of that functionality for saving notes, reading notes, listing notes, and removing notes. The last thing I want to do before we wrap this video up is switch how we fetch the command. As we know, the command is available in the underscore property as the first and only item, which means right here, we can set command equal to argv, then dot underscore, then we're going to use brackets to grab the first item in the array. With this in place, we now have the same functionality, but we're using Yargs everywhere. And if I rerun the last command, we can test that the functionality still works, and it does. Command remove shows up. That is it for this one. I will see you next time as we start filling out the individual functions. We're going to take a look first at how we can use JSON to store our notes inside of our file system. That is coming up next, so stay tuned. I will see you soon.